as far back as I can remember, and even at the age when the mind still has no power over the senses, I find traces of my love for boys. I have always loved the stronger sex, and believe that it can legitimately be called the fair sex. My misfortunes are due to a society which condemns anything out of the ordinary as a crime, and forces us to reform our natural inclinations. 3 decisive incidents come back to me. My father lived in a small chateau near Sully. This chateau possessed a park.
At the end of the park was a farm and a watering place which did not belong to the chateau.
My father allowed them to remain unfenced in exchange for dairy produce and eggs,
Which the farmer brought up every day.
One morning in August, I was roaming round the grounds carrying a loaded rifle. I was pretending to be a sportsman. And since I had hidden behind a hedge on the lookout for some animal, I saw from my hiding place a young farm boy taking a cart horse to have a wash.
He knew that no one ever came down to the far end of the grounds and had taken his clothes off so that he could go into the water. The sunburn on his face, neck, arms, and feet contrasted with the whiteness of his other skin.
And reminded me of sweet chestnuts bursting out of their husks. But these dark patches were not the only ones. My attention was attracted by another, and in its whose midst was an enigma visible in all its detail. My ears buzzed, my face flushed, my legs felt weak, my heart pounded as though I had committed a murder. Without realizing it, I fainted, and was only found after a search lasting 4 hours. Once I had recovered, I instinctively took care not to reveal the cause of my weakness. And at the risk of appearing ridiculous, I said that a hare had rushed out from beneath the thick clumps of trees and startled me. The second incident occurred the following year. My father allowed gypsies to camp in the same place at the end of the park where I had lost consciousness. I was going for a walk with my nursemaid. Suddenly she pulled me away, calling out that I mustn't turn round. The heat was blinding. 2 young gypsies had taken their clothes off and were climbing the trees. The sight of them terrified my nursemaid, and my disobedience gave the scene an unforgettable horror. If I live to be 100, that shout and that chase will always make me remember a caravan, a woman feeding a newborn baby, a smoky fire, a white horse cropping up grass, and, up in the trees, 2 bronze bodies, each with 3 patches of black. Merci.
Je vous en prie.
The last occasion, if I am not mistaken, concerned a young servant named Gustave. When he waited at table, he had delighted me. Through turning over and over in my head the memories of the farm boy and the gypsies, I began to hope eagerly that my hand might touch what my eyes had seen. My plan was extremely naive. I intended to draw a woman and take the sheet of paper to Gustave. I would make him laugh, encourage him, and then ask if I could touch the mystery whose existence I saw in my imagination while he waited at table beneath a significant bulge in his trousers. My nursemaid was the only woman I had ever seen in her shift, and I believed that artists invented women with firm breasts, whereas in reality they were all flabby. My drawing was realistic.
He burst out laughing, as to his model was.
And I, taking advantage of the fact that he was shaking, went straight to the point with inconceivable audacity.
He repulsed him, went very red,
Pulled my ears, alleging that I was tickling him.
and desperately afraid of losing his job.
Led me to the door,
A few days later, he stole some wine.
and my father dismissed him. I interceded. I wept. But all in vain. My mother had died while giving birth to me, and I had always lived alone with my father. A sad and charming man.
His sadness preceded the loss of his wife.
Even when contented, he had been sad. And this is why I sought reasons for a sadness which lay deeper than his bereavement. Pederast knows pederast as Jew knows Jew.
They sense each other beneath the mask.
And I undertook to discover them between the lines of the most innocent books. This passion is less simple than the moralist might suppose.
There exist pederasts who are unaware of their own nature and live to the end of their days in a state of uneasiness which they ascribe to poor health or a jealous nature.
I have always believed that my father was too much like me to differ in this major point.
He was no doubt unaware of his inclination. And instead of pursuing it, he strenuously followed another without ever knowing what made his life so unbearable.
His tastes were revealed to me by odd phrases, his way of walking, and endless details about his person. discovered them, or found the opportunity to develop them, he would have been astonished.
At that period, people killed themselves for less.
But no,
He lived in ignorance of himself and accepted his burden.
it is perhaps to this blindness that I owe my existence. I regret the fact. For if my father had known the delights which would have prevented my misfortunes, we should both have been happier. I went into the fourth form at the Lycée Condorcet.
Our senses were awakening in uncontrolled fashion, growing like weeds. Nothing but pockets with holes in them and soiled handkerchiefs.
The art class in particular emboldened the boys because we were concealed by a wall of papers. Sometimes, during an ordinary class, a sarcastic teacher would suddenly question a boy who was on the point of an orgasm.
He'd stand up,
His cheeks burning.
stammer out whatever came into his head while trying to turn his tablet into a fig leaf.
Our laughter made him even more embarrassed. The classroom smelt of gas, chalk, and sperm. This combination nauseated me. I should add that what seemed a vice to the other boys did not seem so to me. To be more precise, since it was a cheap parody of a type of love that my instinct respected, I appeared to be the only one to disapprove of this state of affairs. This led to endless sarcastic remarks and attacks on what my comrades regarded as prudery. But Lycée Condorcet was a day school. These practices did not go as far as love affairs. They hardly went beyond the limits of clandestine play. One of the boys, called Dargelot, possessed virility far in advance of his age.
And enjoyed great prestige as a result.
He exhibited himself in cynical fashion.
And would do so for boys even from other forms in exchange for rare foreign stamps or tobacco.
The seats which surrounded his desk were special seats. I can still see his brown skin.
His extremely short trousers and the socks hanging down over his ankles showed that he was proud of his legs.
We all wore short trousers, but Dargelot had a man's legs.
His open-collared shirt revealed a broad neck. A strongly curled lock of hair fell from his forehead.
His face, with its rather thick lips, slightly narrow eyes, and somewhat flat nose, was characteristic of the type which for me was to prove fatal.
When fatality appears to us in disguise, it gives us an illusion of freedom.
And in the end, always leads us into the same trap. The presence of Dargelot made me ill. I avoided him. I lay in wait for him. I dreamt of some miracle which would make him notice me, destroy his arrogance, and reveal to him the meaning of my attitude, which he was bound to regard as ridiculous prudery, but which in fact was simply due to my frantic desire to please him. When I could bear it no longer, I talked about it to a boy I sometimes saw outside school, whose family had known my father.
You're silly. It's easy. Invite Dargelot out one Sunday. Take him behind the trees and that'll do the trick.
What trick? There wasn't any trick. I muttered that it wasn't a question of the kind of pleasure that could easily be had, and I tried in vain to describe my dream in words.
Why create problems when there are none? Dargelot is stronger than we are. The moment you flatter him, he'll do what you like. If you want him, all you have to do is get him.
The rudeness of this reply overwhelmed me. I realized that it would be impossible to make myself understood. Suppose, I thought, that D'Angelot did agree to a rendezvous. What would I tell him? What would I do? My urge would not be to amuse myself for 5 minutes, but to live with him forever. In fact, I adored him. And I resigned myself to suffering in silence. Without actually describing my suffering as love, I sensed that it was very different from what went on in the classroom, and that it would find no response there. This story had no beginning, but it had an end. Urged on by the boy I had confided in, I asked D'Angelot to meet me in an empty classroom after 5 o'clock prep. He came.
What do you want?
I had relied on some miracle to determine my conduct, but in his presence I lost my head. I could see nothing but his strong legs, his scarred knees emblazoned with scabs and ink.
What do you want?
I want to tell you that the vice principal's got his eye on you.
What?
This was a ridiculous lie, for the magic of D'Angelot had bewitched our teachers. Beauty holds vast privileges. It acts even on those who appear to take the least notice of it.
The vice principal?
Yes, the vice principal. I heard him talking to the headmaster. I'm watching D'Angelot. He's going too far. I've got my eye on him.
So I'm going too far, am I? Well, I'll show it to the vice principal. I'll show it to him when he's ready for action. And as for you, messing me about just to tell me some stupid story like that, I warn you, if you try it again, you'll get a kick in the pants.
Stupid kid. He vanished. For a week I pretended I had a stomachache to avoid coming into class and having to face D'Angelot. When I returned, I heard that he was ill and was keeping to his room. I didn't dare ask about him, but there were rumors. He was a Boy Scout. There was talk of a reckless bath in the Seine, icy cold water, and then angina. One afternoon, during a geography lesson, we heard that he was dead. Youth is not tender-hearted. For many of the boys, this news, which the teacher announced to us standing, was merely a tacit authorization to do nothing. The next day, habit closed over their mourning. In spite of everything, eroticism had received its death blow. Too many little pleasures were disturbed by the ghost of the handsome animal whose charm had moved even death itself. In the fifth form, after the holidays, a radical change had taken place in my friends.
Our voices were breaking.
We were smoking,
We were shaving off shadowy mustaches.
going out bareheaded,
And wearing English-type shorts.
or long trousers.
Onanism gave way to boasting. Postcards circulated. All these young things now turned towards women as plants turn to the sun. It was then, in order to follow the others, that I began to falsify my nature. As they hastened towards their own truth, they dragged me towards falsehood. I forced myself to follow their example and share their enthusiasm, but I kept having to overcome my feelings of shame. In the end, this self-discipline made my task fairly easy. In addition, I would repeat that debauchery was no fun for anyone, but that the other boys put more goodwill into it than I did. On Sundays, if it was fine,
We would set off in a body with our tennis rackets.
Saying that we were going to play at O'Toole.
On the way, we would deposit the rackets with the concierge at a fellow pupil's house,
His family lived in Marseille.
and hurried off to the brothels in the Rue de Provence.
outside the leather-covered doors, the natural shyness of our age returned.
Oh, we walked up and down, hesitating like bathers beside cold water.
We would toss up to see who would go in first.
I was always terrified that I might be chosen.
Finally, the victim would creep closely along the wall.
Go through the door.
And lead us in after him. Nothing is more intimidating than children and whores. Too much separates us from them. We don't know how to break the silence and put ourselves on their level. In the Rue de Provence, the only meeting place was the bed where I lay down beside the girl, and the act which we performed together, without the slightest enjoyment.
The following week, we pulled our resources.
Took the stage box at the El Dorado for Sunday matinee.
Threw bunches of violets at the singers.
And waited for them outside the stage door in the freezing cold.
I mentioned these insignificant adventures in order to show you how tired and empty our Sunday outings left us, and how surprised I was to hear my comrades describing the details all week long. One night, when I was going back to my uncle's house, later than usual, a woman with a soft voice accosted me in the Place de la Madeleine. I looked at her, found her delightful, young, and fresh.
Her name was Rose, and she enjoyed talking. And we walked up and down until the time when the market people, sitting sleepily on their vegetable carts, drove their horses across the deserted Paris.
I was leaving for Switzerland the next day. I gave Rose my name and address. She sent me letters on squared paper, enclosing a stamp for my reply. I wrote back willingly. When I returned, I found Rose in the place where we had first met.
I asked her to come to my hotel in the Place Pigalle.
The Hotel Mogador was dismal. The staircase stank of ether, which provides consolation for the whores who come home too tired to speak. The room was typical of those in which the bed is never made.
Rose smoked in bed.
I complimented her on her looks.
It wasn't long before we became lovers.
One Sunday there was a knock at the door. Rose told me not to worry, that it was her brother, that he would be delighted to see me. This brother resembled the farm boy and Gustave from my childhood.
He was 19.
And everything about him was in the worst possible taste. He was called Alfred, or Alfredo, and he spoke an odd kind of French. But I didn't worry about his nationality. He seemed to me to belong to the country of prostitution, which has its own patriotism, and possibly this was its language. The slope which led me towards the sister was slightly uphill, but it is easy to guess the headlong descent which took me to the brother. He was, as his compatriots say, on the ball, and we soon resorted to Apache-like tricks so that we could meet without Rose's knowledge. For me, Alfred's body was more like the ones I saw in my dreams than the young, powerfully equipped body of an adolescent. A perfect body, rigged out with muscles like a ship with ropes, its limbs appearing to open out like a star around that fleece where there rises, in contrast to a woman who is built for concealment, the only thing about a man which cannot lie. Alfred returned my caresses. He confessed to me that he was not Rose's brother.
He was her pimp.
Rose continued to play her part, and we ours.
Alfred would wink
Dig me in the ribs.
and sometimes start to giggle.
Rose looked at him with surprise, not suspecting that we were in league, and that there existed between us links that were strengthened by deceit.
But Alfred
Who was lazy?
began to find lying wearisome.
He confided to me.
I can no longer go on with this sort of life. I hate working on one side of the road while Rose is working on the other, walking up and down this open-air shop where the sellers are themselves for sale.
In other words, he asked me to extricate him from it. Nothing could have pleased me more. We decided that I would book a hotel room in the town district.
Alfred would occupy it at once.
I would go to join him after dinner and spend the night. Meanwhile, I would pretend to Rose that I thought he had disappeared and would go to look for him. This would set me free and allow us much valuable time. I booked the room, settled Alfred in, and dined with my uncle. After dinner, I rushed to the hotel. Alfred had flown. I waited from 9 o'clock until 1 in the morning. Alfred did not return, and I went back home with a broken heart. At about 11 o'clock the next morning, I went to find out what was happening.
Alfred was asleep in his room.
Oh, he woke up and, whimpering, told me that he couldn't help going back to his old habits.
That he couldn't do without Rose.
That he'd been looking for her all night. First at her hotel, where she was no longer living.
And then from one pavement to another, in every brasserie in the Faubourg Montmartre, in the dance halls of the Rue de la.
She is staying with one of her girlfriends in the Rue de Budapest.
You must take me there at once.
I did. I was due to follow my uncle to Toulon in order to attend the wedding of my cousin, a daughter of Vice-Admiral Georges Fabian. The future looked dark to me. I told Rose about this family expedition and left her with an unusually silent Alfred at the hotel in the Place Pigalle. I promised to come and see them when I returned. While in Toulon, I noticed that Alfred had taken a little gold chain of mine. It was my lucky charm. I had put it round his wrist and had forgotten doing so, while he had taken good care not to remind me. Home again in Paris, I went straight to the hotel. As I entered the room, Rose flung her arms round me. It was dark. At first glance, I did not recognize Alfred. What was so different about him?
The police were scouring Montmartre.
Alfred and Rose were afraid because of their doubtful nationality. They had obtained false passports and were preparing to make their getaway, while Alfred, intoxicated by the romance of the cinema, had had his hair dyed. Beneath these inky black locks, his small, fair-skinned face stood out with anthropometric clarity. I demanded my chain back from him.
I don't have your damn chain.
Rose gave him away. He threw a tantrum, swore, threatened her, threatened me, and brandished a pistol. I went down the stairs 4 at a time with Alfred on my heels. In the street, I hailed a taxi. I called out my address, jumped in quickly, and as the taxi moved off, I looked round.
Alfred was standing motionless outside the door of the hotel.
Big tears were running down his cheeks.
He stretched out his arm.
He called my name. I wanted to tap on the glass and stop the driver. Confronted by this solitary distress, I was undecided about returning like a coward to my home comforts. But then I thought of the chain, the weapon, the false passports, the flight in which Rose would surely ask me to join. I closed my eyes. Even now, I have only to close my eyes in an old red taxi to conjure up the small figure of Alfred and his tearful face beneath that gangster's hairstyle.
Dans un décor du meilleur goût, nous commandons en bavardant tout bas, de ci, de ça, des cocktails pour deux, en fumant une cigarette.
Since the Admiral was ill and my cousin away on her honeymoon, I decided to return to Toulon. It would be tedious to describe that delightful solitude, where the fire of heaven falls without danger, striking by means of caressing sunshine. Before dusk, an even softer atmosphere floods the town, and,
As in Naples.
As in Venice,
a fairground crowd moves through the squares, ornamented with fountains,
Noisy shops.
waffle stall,
And street hawkers.
men in love with masculine beauty come from all corners of the globe to admire the sailors who walk about idly.
Hello.
or in groups,
Responding to glances with a smile.
and never refuse an offer of love.
Some nocturnal assault transforms the most brutal jailbird, the roughest Breton, the most savage Corsican, into those tall, flower-decked girls with no décolleté, whose loose limbs like dancing and lead their partners without the slightest bit of embarrassment into the shady hotels by the port.
One of the cafes with a dance floor was kept by a former cafe concert singer who had a woman's voice and used to exhibit himself in women's clothing. Now he sports a pullover and rings. He is flanked by colossal men wearing caps with red pom-poms. They worshipped him, and he ill-treated them. His wife called out lists of drinks in a harsh, naive voice, and he noted them down in large, childish handwriting, with his tongue hanging out.
One evening, when I entered the place kept by this astonishing creature, surrounded by the respectful attentions of his wife and his men, I remained rooted to the spot. I had just caught sight of the ghost of Dargelot, a man I could see from the side leaning against the pianola. Dargelot in sailor's uniform. This double possessed in particular the arrogance, the insolent and absent-minded air of Dargelot,
On his cap
which was tilted forward over his left eyebrow.
could be read in gold letters,
Tabageuse.
He wore a tight black scarf around his neck and those trousers with tabs which, in the past, allowed sailors to roll them up to their thighs, and are today forbidden by regulations on the pretext that they are worn by pimps.
In any other place, I would never have dared stand in the orbit of that arrogant gaze. But Toulon is Toulon. Dancing avoids the awkwardness of introductions. It throws strangers into each other's arms and forms a prelude to love. To music full of ringlets and kiss curls, we danced a waltz. The backward-leaning bodies were linked together at the groin. Profiles were grave and eyes lowered. The faces moved around more slowly than the feet, which wove in and out and sometimes came down like horses' hooves. The free hands assumed the graceful pose affected by the working class when they drink a glass of wine and when they piss it away. A springtime ecstasy excited those bodies. Branches grew in them, hardness crushed hardness, and the couples would leave for bedrooms with clock-kissed lampshades and eiderdowns. Stripped of the accessories which intimidate a civilian, those affected by sailors to give themselves confidence, Tapageuse became a timid animal. This boy, who for me represented good luck,
Bore on his chest the words
Pas de
chance,
chance.
tattooed in blue capital letters.
He told me his story. It was short.
I'm unlucky, and I always will be.
I'm not giving this to you. That wouldn't protect either of us. But keep it for this evening. Next, with my fountain pen, I crossed out the ominous tattooing.
Beneath it, he drew a star and a heart.
He smiled.
He understood
More with his skin than with anything
that
else.
he was safe.
But our encounter was not like those he was used to.
Brief moments of self-gratification. Unlucky.
Was it possible? With that mouth, those eyes, those teeth, that belly, those iron muscles, those shoulders, those legs. Pas de chance.
Unlucky.
With that fabulous little underwear plant, lying dead and crumpled on the moss, which unfolded, grew bigger, reared up, and threw its seed far away as soon as it found the element of love. I couldn't get over it. And in order to avoid this problem, I sank into a feigned sleep. Pas de chance remained motionless beside me. Gradually, I felt that he was embarking on a delicate maneuver in order to free his arm on which my elbow was resting. I watched him through barely closed eyelids.
First, he weighted the chain several times in his hand, kissed it, and rubbed it on his tattoo.
And then, with the terrible slowness of a player who is cheating, he tested my sleep, coughed, touched me, listened to my breathing, brought his face close to my hand, which lay wide open near my face, and gently leaned his cheek against it. I was the indiscreet witness of this attempt by an unlucky boy who could feel a lifeboat coming close to him on the open sea. And I had to restrain myself from losing control, pretending to wake up and ruining my life. At dawn, I left him. My eyes avoided his.
Which were full of all the hope that he felt, but could not express.
He returned the chain to me. I embraced him, tucked him in bed, and put out the light. I had almost reached the corner before I realized that I had forgotten my gloves. I went back upstairs. A light shone through the glass over the door. Someone must have turned the lamp on again. I couldn't resist putting my eye to the keyhole. Pas de chance had buried his face in my gloves and was weeping bitterly. I hesitated outside that door for 10 minutes. I was about to open it when the face of D'Argelot superimposed itself with great precision on that of Pas de chance. "What do you want?" I went back downstairs on tiptoe, asked again for the door to be unlocked, and went into the street. Outside, a fountain was conducting a grave monologue over the empty square. "No," I thought. "We don't belong to the same order. He's already beautiful enough to move a flower, a tree, or an animal. Impossible to live with." Day was breaking. Cocks were crowing over the sea. A dark coolness gave away its presence. A man emerged from the street carrying a shotgun. I went back to my hotel, weighed down with a heavy burden. Sickened by emotional adventures, incapable of reaction, I dragged my feet and my soul. I sought the consolation of a more secretive atmosphere. I found it in a working-class établissement de bain.
It was reminiscent of the Satyricon, with its little cells, its central courtyard, and its low room decorated with Turkish divans where young men sat playing cards.
At a sign from the proprietor, they would get up and stand in a row along the wall.
The owner would feel their biceps,
Squeeze their thighs,
uncover their intimate charms.
and offer them as a salesman offers his wares.
The clients were sure of their tastes, quick and discreet.
I must have been a problem for these young men who are accustomed to precise demands. In the end, I envy those who do not suffer vaguely from beauty, who know what they want, bring a vice to the point of perfection, pay, and satisfy it.
One man wanted to be insulted.
Another weighted down with chains.
Everyone knew the exact recipe for his pleasure.
Their existence was simplified because they bought themselves on a fixed stay,
At a fixed price.
an honest bourgeois complication,
Most of them were rich industrialists who came from the north to satisfy their needs.
and then rejoin their wives and children.
In the end, I spaced out my visits. My presence was beginning to look suspicious. The French find it difficult to tolerate a character that is not true to type.
The miser must always be
A
miserly.
jealous man jealous.
This explains the success of Molière. The proprietor thought that I was attached to the police. He made me understand that one was either buyer or seller. One couldn't be both. This warning jolted me out of my laziness and forced me to break with unworthy habits, to which was added the memory of D'Angelot perpetually floating over the faces of young bakers,
Butchers,
Cyclists.
telegraph boys,
Sailors.
acrobats.
and other professional masks. One of my few regrets was the two-way mirror.
He went into a dark cabin and opened a shutter.
The shutter revealed a small metallic canvas that revealed a bathroom through which the eye could see.
On the other side of the canvas was a mirror that reflected so well from such a smooth surface that it was impossible to guess that it was full of eyes.
Out of the 12 mirrors in the 12 bathrooms, this was the only one of its sort. The owner had acquired it for a very high price and had it brought in from Germany.
His staff were unaware of the observatory and supplied the show.
Due to financial reasons, I happened to spend a Sunday there.
Once, a narcissus who was pleasuring himself
Brought his mouth up to the mirror
put it to the glass.
and completed the adventure with himself.
Invisible as a Greek god, I pressed my lips against his and imitated his gestures. He never knew that the mirror, instead of reflecting, was participating. That it was alive and loved him. Chance led me towards a new life. I emerged from a bad dream. I had fallen into all that was worst, an unhealthy, idle existence. I knew and admired Père Xavier. His touch was near miraculous. He could make everything appear less burdensome. He knew nothing about my intimate life. He merely sensed that I was unhappy. He talked to me, comforted me, and introduced me to highly intelligent Catholics. I have always been a believer. My belief was confused. through frequenting a pure milieu, seeing so much peace on people's faces, and understanding the stupidity of unbelievers, I move towards God. Normal love, I thought, is not denied me. Nothing prevents me from founding a family and returning to the straight and narrow path. In fact, I merely yield to my inclinations through fear of making any effort. Nothing beautiful exists without effort. I will fight against the devil, and I will be victorious. The church cradled me. I felt I was the adopted son of a divine family. I rose towards heaven as a cork rises to the surface of the water. During Mass, when the star of sacrifice dominates the altar and heads are bowed, I prayed ardently to the Virgin Mary that she would take me under her holy protection. Hail Mary, full of grace, are you not purity itself? Can there be any question with you of precedence of freedom? What men believe to be indecent, surely you see it as we see the amorous exchanges of pollens and atoms. I will obey your Son's ministers on earth. But I know very well that his goodness does not stop with the chicanery of Father Sinistrari and the rules of an old criminal code. Amen. After a religious crisis, the soul had a relapse. This was the difficult moment. The grown man does not shed his skin as easily as the snake that leaves its light robe hanging on the briars. The devil, who had gone out through the door, comes back through the window, disguised as a ray of sunshine. The sun is an old lover who knows his role well. I was again on the wrong track. I tried again to take myself in hand. In the end, my prayer was reduced to a plea for forgiveness. God, you forgive me. You understand me. You understand everything. Have you not desired everything? Made everything? Bodies, sexes, the waves, the sky, and the sun, which loved Hyacinth and turned him into a flower. It is impossible to find one's salvation in battle. The soul is too divided. I decided to go to the sea. There I would move between the church and a boat. I would prey on the waves, far from all distraction. Discovered a little deserted beach where I went to bathe. I would pull my boat up on the shingle and dry myself among the seaweed. One morning, I found a young man there bathing in the nude. He asked if I was shocked. My frank reply enlightened him about my taste.
We were soon lying side by side.
I learned that he was staying in the neighboring village and that he was convalescing after suspected tuberculosis. Sunshine speeds the growth of feelings. We moved fast, and thanks to numerous encounters in the midst of nature, far from objects which distract the heart, we came to love each other without ever having spoken of love. Ash left his inn and came to stay at my hotel.
He wrote.
He believed in God, but affected a puerile indifference towards dogma. The church, this likable heretic, he would repeat.
Demands from us a moral prosody equivalent to that of Blanc. If you place 1 foot in the church, which maintains that it does not move, and 1 foot in modern life, you're trying to live with your feet apart. I say that active obedience is the opposite of passive obedience. God loves love. In loving one another, we prove to Christ that we can read between the lines, which are inevitably those of a severe legislator. Speaking to the masses forbids anything that mixes the common with the rare.
He laughed at my remorse, which he regarded as weakness. He disapproved of my inhibitions. I love you, he would repeat.
And I congratulate myself on loving you.
Perhaps our dream could have endured beneath the sky where we lived half on land, half in the water, like mythological divinities. But his mother summoned him back, and we decided to return to Paris together.
His mother lived in Versailles.
And since I was living with my uncle, we rented a hotel room where we met every day.
He had many women friends.
They did not alarm me unduly, for I had often observed that perverts enjoy the society of women, while men who like women despise them utterly, and apart from the use they make of them, prefer the company of other men. Hello. One morning when he spoke to me from Versailles, I noticed that the telephone, which favors lying, brought me a voice different from the usual one. I asked if he was really speaking from Versailles. He became upset, quickly arranged to meet me at the hotel at 4 o'clock the same day, and hung up. I was chilled to the marrow, spurred on by the terrible desire to know the truth. I phoned his mother. She replied that he had not been home for several days, and that he was staying with a friend because his work was keeping him late in town. How could I wait until 4 o'clock? The truth became clear to me. Mademoiselle Valentine Gosse, whom I had believed to be a friend, was his mistress. He met her in the evening and spent the night with her. This certainty pierced my breast like the claw of some wild animal. Although I knew this beyond any doubt, I still hoped he would find an excuse and would be able to give proof of his innocence.
At 4 o'clock, he admitted that in the past he had loved women, and that he kept going back to them.
Led by some invisible force.
You mustn't be upset. It's something very different from the love I have for you. I love you. I'm disgusted with myself, but there's nothing I can do about it.
Every sanatorium was full of similar cases. This twofold sexuality must be put down to tuberculosis. I asked him to choose between women and me, believing that he would choose me and try to renounce women.
I'm taking the risk of making a promise and breaking my word.
I was mistaken.
It's better to break it off. You would suffer. I don't want you to suffer. A break would hurt you less than false promise and lies.
Goodbye. You were all I lived for. I had nothing else but you. Where will I go? How will I wait for the day? And after the day, the next day, and the night, and the following, how will I spend the weeks? I could see only a confused room moving through my tears, and I was counting days and nights on my fingers with moronic gestures. Suddenly he awoke as though from an hypnotic spell, put his arms around me, begged for my forgiveness, and swore to me that all women
can go to hell.
He wrote a letter to Mademoiselle Valentine, breaking things off. She feigned suicide by swallowing a whole tube of sleeping tablets. And we lived for 3 weeks in the country, leaving no address. 2 months went by. I was happy. It was the day before a big religious festival. Before attending Mass, I was in the habit of going to confession. Père Xavier more or less expected me. As he entered the room, I warned him that I was not coming to confess, but to tell my story. And that, unfortunately, I knew his verdict in advance. Mon père, do you love me? I love you. Would you be glad to learn that at last I feel happy?
Very glad.
Well, know that I am happy, but in a way that the church and the world disapprove of. For it's friendship that makes me happy, and for me, friendship has no boundaries.
I believe you are the victim of scruples.
Mon père, I would never offend the church by believing that it comes to terms and deceives people. I know what happens in friendships that go too far.
Mon fils.
Who is being deceived? God is watching me. Shall I measure to the inch the slope which separates me from sin?
My dear boy, if it were merely a question of risking your place in heaven, you wouldn't be risking very much. For you believe that God's goodness surpasses what we can imagine. But what of your place on earth? The Jesuits are watching you closely.
As I went back home, along walls over which came the smell of gardens, I thought, how admirable is the economy of God. It gives love when one lacks it, and then in order to avoid a pleonasm of the heart, refuses it to those who have it. The next day, I received a telegram.
Don't worry. Left on a trip with Marcel. Telegraph time return.
This telegram astounded me. There had been no talk of a trip the day before. Marcel was a friend from whom I need fear no treachery, but I knew that he was wild enough to decide on a trip on the spur of the moment, without reflecting how vulnerable his partner was, or that dashing off like that was likely to prove dangerous. I was about to go and question Marcel's servant when another telegram arrived. It was from Mademoiselle Valentine.
Don't you know that this boy adores me and comes to see me every night? He comes from Versailles and goes home before dawn.
It is pointless to describe the state into which this threw me. I received more telegrams.
Long live Marseille!
Or,
Leaving for Tunis.
the homecoming was terrible.
He thought he'd be scolded like a child after a joke.
I asked Marcel to leave us alone, and I flung Mademoiselle Valentine's name at him.
He denied it.
Finally, he admitted it, and I hit him. Pain intoxicated me. I beat him like a brute. I took hold of his head by the ears, and I banged it against the wall.
A trickle of blood ran down the corner of his mouth.
In a moment, I became sober. Crazed with tears, I wanted to kiss that poor, bruised face, but I encountered only a flash of blue over which the eyelids closed in pain. I fell to my knees in the corner of the bedroom.
Forgive me. I am your slave. Do what you like with me, please. Just forgive me.
Please.
There was a month's truce. A sweet and weary truce after the storm. We were like dahlias leaning over when soaked with water.
You looked unwell. He was pale and stayed at Versailles.
Nothing embarrasses me when talking about sexual relationships. But modesty holds back when I come to describing the tortures which I am capable of bearing. So I will describe them in a few words and not mention them again. Love breaks me in two. Even when I am calm, I live in constant fear that this calm might cease, and this anxiety prevents me from enjoying its pleasures. The slightest setback ruins everything. I find it impossible not to see the worst side of things. Nothing prevents me from losing my foothold, even if I have only slipped. Waiting is one form of torture. Possessing is another, through fear of losing what I possess. This doubt caused me to pass wakeful nights walking up and down, lying on the floor, hoping that the floor would sink down, eternally down. I promised myself that I would not say a word about my fears. As soon as I was in Ash's presence, I plied him with compliments and questions. He said nothing. His silence either drove me into a frenzy or else made me weep. I accused him of hating me, of wanting to kill me. He knew very well that replies were useless and that I would start again the next day. That was September. November 12th is a date that I will never forget for the rest of my life. We were due to meet at the hotel at 6 o'clock. The proprietor stopped me downstairs.
The police have raided your room. Your friend has been taken down to police headquarters with a large suitcase. They left in a car containing the commissioner of the vice squad and plainclothesmen.
Ash had again been deceiving me. This time with a Russian woman who gave him drugs. Learning that there was to be a raid, she asked him to take the cigarettes and powders to the hotel. Some thug who he had met and in whom he had confided had given him away. He was a police spy. So, at the same moment, I learned that I had been betrayed twice over in an underhanded fashion. I begged him to give up
He
drugs.
replied that he wanted to, but that the addiction was too far in advance for him to turn back.
The next day, they telephoned me from Versailles to say that he had begun to spit blood and that he had been rushed to a nursing home in the Rue Blanc. He was in room 55 on the 3rd floor. As I entered the room, he barely had the strength to turn his head towards me. His nose had become slightly flattened. He looked sadly at his transparent hands.
I'll tell you a secret. I was both woman and man. The woman was subjection to you. The man rebelled against that subjection. I didn't like women. I sought them out to sidetrack myself and prove to myself that I was free. The vain, stupid man within me was the enemy of our love. I'm sorry about that. I'll obey you unquestioningly and spend my time making up
hardly slept all night. Towards morning, I fell asleep for a few moments and had a dream. I was at the circus with Ash. The circus became a restaurant consisting of 2 small rooms. In one of them, a singer seated at a piano announced that he was going to play a new song. The title was the name of a woman who had dominated the world of fashion in 1900. This title, after the introduction, was an insult in 1926. The magnifying power of this absurd song to something celestial and extraordinarily funny. I woke up. I was still laughing, and this laughter seemed to me a good omen. If the situation were serious, I thought, I would not have had such a ridiculous dream. I had forgotten that the exhaustion of grief sometimes does produce ridiculous dreams. In the Rue Blanche, I was about to open the door to the private ward when a nurse stopped me.
Number 55 is no longer in his room. He's in the chapel.
How did I find the strength to turn and go back? In the chapel, a woman was praying by the slab where my friend's body had been laid. How calm it was, that beloved face that I had struck. But what did the memory of my blows or caresses mean to me now? He no longer loved either his mother or women or me or anyone. For death interests the dead alone. Terrible solitude. I did not think that I would turn again to the church. It would be too easy to turn to heaven when we lose what delighted us on earth. There remained an expedient of marriage, but I had no hopes of making a love match. I would have considered it dishonest to deceive a young girl. At the Sorbonne, I had known a Mademoiselle de Sauvignon, whom I had liked because of her boyish air. And I had often said that if I had to marry, I would prefer her to anyone else. I renewed our acquaintance, frequently visited the house at Auteuil, and gradually we came to consider marriage as a possibility. She had a younger brother, whom I had not met because he was away completing his studies near London.
He came back.
Why had I not foreseen this new trick of fate, which persecutes me and conceals beneath other guises a destiny which is always the same? The things I had liked about the sister were striking to the brother. From the moment I saw him, I understood the tragedy and the fact that a pleasant existence would be denied me. It did not take me long to learn that the brother, in true English fashion,
Had been struck with love at first sight.
this young man was in love with himself. In loving me, he was deceiving himself.
We concealed our crimes skillfully.
But this atmosphere disturbed my fiancée all the more because she did not suspect its origin. Eventually, the love the brother felt for me turned to passion. Did this passion possibly conceal a secret need to destroy?
He hated his sister. Withdraw your promise. Break off the engagement.
I slowed things down as best I could. I worked to obtain a relative calm, which merely postponed the catastrophe. One evening, when I was coming to visit the sister, I could hear the sound of weeping coming through the door. The poor girl was lying full length on the floor with a handkerchief in her mouth and her long hair hanging down.
Her brother was standing over her. He's mine! He's mine, mine, mine! And since he doesn't have the courage to tell you, I'm doing so myself!
I couldn't bear this scene. His voice and manner were so cruel that I struck him on the face.
You will always regret you did that.
You will always regret you did that. He shut himself in his bedroom. While I was trying to revive the sister, I rushed out. I opened his bedroom door. Too late. He was lying at the foot of the wardrobe mirror, on which, at head height, I could still see the grease mark of his lips and the blurred mist left by his breath. The smoke and blood mixed with a lost sense of innocence, which threw me into a feverish dream. I held a motionless spirit with his profile silhouetted against the wall. It was that of Alfred.
Alfred.
Ash.
Ash.
Rose.
Rose.
D'Argelot. Gustave.
Gustave.
Pas de chance.
Unlucky.
And the farm hand. However, it is time to depart, friends. I can no longer live in a world where ill luck and mourning haunt me. I shall travel abroad, leaving these chapters of my life behind me. I hope that they will help you understand that in exiling myself, I am not exiling a monster, but a man whom society will not allow to live because it considers one of the mysterious cogs in God's masterpiece to be a mistake. Remember, love must be reinvented.
The world accepts dangerous experiments in the realm of art because it does not take art seriously, but it condemns them in life.
But no one will prevent